We will have Iowa football, although it will be Iowa versus Iowa football, but popping pads, at least running in shorts and sweats coming up this Wednesday. That means fall camp is here, finally. Maybe the best thing to indicate all that is, of course, it is August, and we will have big-time college football in the Big Ten in August. So Iowa fans, get excited. The 2022 season is near. Hawkeyes Live coming your way for a 53rd time for the next 60 minutes. And, of course, Corey Brad is here to make it all work. Join Corey on from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Hey, Corey.
Mark, I appreciate you being patient with me these last 2 weeks. You and I are both going through some transition, so don't have the typical studio here. But yeah, no, it's exciting. I loved your tweet. Was it yesterday that I know it's such a simple tweet, but I've said it like 3 times today to like my wife and people around me. I've just said, hey, guess what? It's August, and there's college football in August. So, I mean, I'm excited about it. I hope people are excited. I don't think people realize how big those 2 games are. The first 2 games, well, I believe there is a big. See, who else plays week 0? Isn't there another Big Ten team that plays week 0 besides the Ireland game?
Illinois, Wyoming.
Okay, so I'm not talking about that one. I don't really care. But although Iowa fans, Tim Polasek is out at Wyoming, former Iowa assistant coach. But
I know you don't care about the Vandy Hawaii game in week 0.
Is that out in Hawaii?
In Hawaii.
Okay. No, I don't really care about that.
You need to capitalize. It's a good thing I take note of that. Corey, this is for your benefit. You can capitalize on the SEC possibly being 0-1.
Yeah.
So you can jump
very
on
much
that.
so, but we've basically established that Vanderbilt, I mean, they do count, but what are the expectations? What's their over-under this year? Do you know?
Probably 2.5.
Is it basically always 2.5? I mean, is there ever... I mean, they've been to bowl games here and there in their history, right?
Sure. They are about 4 to 5 seasons removed from a 6-win season and a bowl game.
So Eric says Corey is crazy. I'd like to know why I'm crazy. He says that Vandy Hawaii is going to be the best game. It might be the best game. That doesn't mean he thinks it's going to be better than Nebraska Northwestern over in Ireland.
Well, who can ever predict which is going to be the best game? Sure. You could have 2 lousy teams play a exciting 48-45 game, and they're both lousy.
Well, the reason I said the first 2, and again, I understand that. The first 2 Big Ten matchups of the year are massive implications in both. You talk about the Northwestern Illinois game in Ireland. We think about what did I say? Illinois, Northwestern Nebraska game in Ireland. You think about how big that is for Scott Frost. I think it's also big for Pat Fitzgerald. We've talked with our Northwestern media guys, and they don't seem to think that Pat Fitzgerald's on the hot seat. You and I both know he's not. I don't know how many bad seasons he'd have to have. I think another bad season, people start to get antsy because last year was really bad. But it's going to be interesting to see how he bounces back this year. And you just look at Nebraska with Scott Frost. We know his clock is ticking. We thought it might have ran out last year. I've said it before, and I think you're going to be talking about this at nauseum in the coming weeks as we count down the days to week 0. That game is huge. I mean, he loses that game, Mark. I think the only, let me word it this way. The only way he gets relieved of his duties mid-season, I think, would include a loss in week 0. Because if you win week 0, I just don't see the season derailing early. Now, the back half of the schedule, there's some tough games, as you know, including that Iowa game, which is in Iowa City. The only game that's not been sold out, by the way. We can talk about that in a moment. But that's such a huge game for Scott Frost, and it's just going to be great to see football in Ireland, because wasn't this game scheduled in 2020? Am I correct in saying that?
Well, the game that Nebraska and Illinois played was scheduled to be played in Ireland, that they played in Champaign.
Right. Okay. So so it was Illinois. But yeah, just a massive game. And, now with fall camp starting tomorrow, is it start at the same day for everybody? I just don't even know, Mark.
No,
is
it does not.
So it starts for Iowa. For anybody that doesn't know, it does start tomorrow for Iowa. So I know that's an exciting time for a lot of young prospects who have never been a part of camp. Iowa does send its players to a hotel I know not all universities do that, but this is literally, that's why they call it fall camp. It's literally, and only a select number of guys get invited to fall camp. So it's going to be intriguing. But back to those first two games, the Northwestern Nebraska game, massive implications. And then that Penn State Purdue game, we've talked about that ad nauseum. That's a bigger game for Iowa fans to follow. I said it last week. We talked about Purdue last week. They beat Penn State week 1, and that's a Thursday night game. Purdue, in my book, becomes the favorite to win the West. Not saying they will at that point, but they become the favorite, and I'm not predicting that they'll win. But boy, that's going to be what a start to the college football season. Because, week 0 is going to be great, but it doesn't really feel like it gets going until week 1. And to get a Big Ten game on a Thursday night is just huge.
Yeah, so when I sized up the schedule last year after the Nebraska loss to Illinois, and I rarely, if maybe have never done this, I declared Nebraska's season over after they lost to Illinois. I looked at the rest of the schedule and that they could not beat Illinois. I said, this team's done. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to a bowl. And from a logistical standpoint, looking at schedule, personnel for Nebraska, I don't think that this game is as critical because the schedule's lighter. But
sure,
to be 3-9, to be playing a team that only won one game in the Big Ten like Nebraska did, that was a 49-point game last year, just with everything outside of just sizing up the rest of the schedule and doing the math, it's a larger game. There's more at stake for Nebraska. They do have to beat Northwestern. If they can't beat Northwestern, I don't know how to figure out this football team.
And I understand we're looking at this through the lens of, Northwestern is a 3-9 team last year. Talent wise, they're probably, can we agree they're probably 13th or 14th in the Big Ten in talent? Is that being facetious for this roster? I don't have talent.
Oh, sure.
I know some people rank those talent, they rank talent in the Big Ten, but I'm guessing they're 13th or 14th in the Big Ten. But if I'm a Nebraska fan, and I know we got Nebraska fans watching, I am so nervous for that. Like that game, to me, Pat Fitzgerald playing with house money. Because as we just got done saying, his job ain't gonna be online regardless of what happens in that game. You just got done getting blown out by this team last year, a team that didn't win any other Big Ten games all year. Everybody in the I think every other coach in the Big Ten, with the exception maybe being a guy like James Franklin, who's equally as pompous. I think every other coach in the Big Ten dislikes Scott Frost. So there's already reason and motivation to want to beat him. So I just think it's a dangerous, dangerous game for Nebraska, but both teams have reason to get up for it.
If I'm reading the lean on both coaches per Big Ten Media Days, I think that Scott Frost is a bit uptight. And again, I'm not the person that looks into hearts and minds and tries to come to conclusions. I typically don't do that. But there were things said. I don't read faces. I don't do anything like that. There were actually things stated by Scott Frost that would lead you to believe that they are going to be on edge for this game. This is a business trip. He said that over and over, business trip. We didn't earn this. This is a business trip. And that's great. Obviously, you're there to play football, and especially it being a conference game, win the game. I get that, but it just sounds like it's almost, it had a feel like pre-Super Bowl. If you're into the NFL and you see these Super Bowl documentaries where they highlight both teams and the way they approach the Super Bowl, and sure, there's a point in which you got to get down to business, but where typically the team that's a little looser enjoys the experience, enjoys some of the events, and then maybe about 4 days before they get locked in, while the other team's on edge for like 12 or 13 days, white knuckling the entire experience and
right.
Going through 2-a-days, and then Pat Fitzgerald made the comment that our student athletes, almost all of them, have not experienced a trip to Europe before, so we're going to take advantage of it. We want to win the game. We're going to do everything we can to win the game, but we're going to experience the culture and the events and everything. Like they're going to go over there and have fun.
I have not made my selection for this game yet, nor any of the games, but I'm leaning Northwestern right now.
I'm starting to talk myself into an upset too.
I just, here's the deal. Everything you just said, and you think that as of right now, and I've seen people rank Big Ten coaches. I'm sure you have. I'd have to go back and look at your rankings. But where does Scott Frost rank as far as Big Ten coaches out of 14 teams right now? Right now. Not projecting.
I ranked him last.
Okay, 14th. Where does Pat Fitzgerald rank in Big Ten coaches?
First or second.
Okay, first. So we potentially have the best coach in the Big Ten versus the worst coach in the Big Ten. And then you think about the fact that it's a week 0 game in Ireland. In Ireland, like variable in the fact that it's overseas, the fact that we're talking about pressure, right? We're talking about tremendous pressure, like all the variables that you need sound coaching. Those are the variables at play here, Mark. That's what's so intriguing about this. Like just the matchup in general with all those circumstances, you're probably going to fall. If it's an even matchup, you're absolutely, at least that's how I'm going to make my selection. I'm going to fall back on the better coach. And there's not a question. Like this isn't even a conversation right now. We're talking about potentially the best coach versus the worst coach. Now the talent gap is something that's there. I get that. So, but man, that's why I'm starting to feel the way you are. I might be going with the Wildcats week 0.
And this is why I question Scott Frost. This is a 5th season, correct? Are we on year 5?
That sounds right.
Yeah, we're on year 5. 2018 was his first year. 5th season. So he is now addressing, let's say, in particular, special teams. That's just one example. That's one example of many. He's now talking a lot about a special teams coordinator that he's finally bringing in and addressing special teams. For example, this team started last year by having a veteran player, really good player, Cam Taylor-Britt, muff a punt inside the 5-yard line that he should have not been. Like he was fielding the ball at like the 2-yard line.
Right.
And that led to a safety, which led to the short kick for the Illinois touchdown to go up 9-0. So that's how their season started. Their season ended with a lead in the 4th quarter against Iowa, early 4th quarter, blocked punt, special teams gaffe leads to the Iowa comeback. They lose. Yep. In between a number, Michigan State in particular, punt return for a touchdown, Michigan. I just don't think that it would be difficult, I think, for myself, for the audience, or for yourself to think of a head coach who entered a program and didn't show immediate results that then turned out to be a success. That was a utter failure for 4 years and then kicked it in, and then they had a successful stint at that school. I cannot think of that example.
And I think it comes down to this. I know there are some people early on, was it RJ Young of Fox? Somebody predicted, I saw this graphic on Fox a long time ago, Mark, that somebody predicted Nebraska to be West favorites this year, which I think is, at the time, I remember thinking, talent-wise, we've never questioned. They do okay there, and they've done pretty well in the transfer portal, although I think some of that has screamed desperation. But, yeah, like the schedule this year certainly would make you at least see a glimmer of hope as it relates to record and bowl projections. I think what we have, they're not going 3-9 this year. Okay, they ain't going 3-9 this year. I think we can all accept that. Iowa last year, now bring this full circle back around to Iowa. Iowa last year did everything it could to get to 10 wins, and Scott Docterman of the Gazette of the Athletic, who was on my episode of Hawkeye Hangout on my channel just a few days ago, I thought he made a really good illustration, and he used the comparison of trying to squeeze the last drop of ketchup out of a bottle, like just did everything they possibly could to eke their way to 10 wins. And like that was the ceiling. So we talk about ceilings and floors all the time. That was Iowa's ceiling last year with everything, with talent, with quarterback play, coaching, everything. That was the ceiling, was 10-4. Now you could say they could have gotten 11-3 with a win of Kentucky because it was a close game, But you think about the three Big Ten losses, Mark, they were blowouts. They were absolute beatdowns. That's a fact. And they won a bunch of close games to get there, all right, to get to 10 wins. And kudos to them. Like, we've talked about this, Mark, on this very show. Winning close games is a skill, right? Some coaches don't have it. Some teams don't have it. But the point is, Nebraska was literally the polar opposite. I mean, their ceiling, they went about it. The season went as bad as it could have gone. Like you could see talent-wise, they hung with almost everyone, basically everyone, even Ohio State they hung with. And yet, every game they could have lost, they lost. I mean, Iowa and Nebraska are literally the polar opposites. So, yeah, it's just an intriguing conversation. I guess we could jump into this. Iowa, this is some news that we got this week. Iowa did finally sell out. I shouldn't say finally, because they sold it out on August 1st. Still got a month before the season. Iowa sold out the home opener against South Dakota State. Every game now but Nebraska has been sold out. Ironically enough, the team that touts this sellout streak, that's the one game in Kinnick that is not yet sold out. Part of that, you attribute to late November games and certainly on a Friday, Black Friday game. But Iowa fans are up for the season, Mark. I don't know what to say. It's impressive. I'm happy to see that fans are gobbling up these tickets. And I saw somebody question, I think it was Big Game Boomer, didn't really rank Iowa. Where did he have Iowa on his rankings, Mark? We were talking about this before we went on the air. He didn't have Iowa very high. Didn't he have him behind like ECU? I mean, it's East Carolina and UTSA as far as game environments. Am I correct in saying that, Mark?
I've had him on twice, and he's a really nice guy.
Yeah,
he's a great guy, very nice guy, and he's opened up a gold mine of information. Well, I shouldn't call it. It's not information. It's opinion.
Absolutely.
That is sometimes grounded in information, depending on the topic, but it's opinion lists that obviously draw the acceptance and ire of fan bases, and it causes a lot of great discussion and debate. So it's good for that. And he's built a really good platform from that standpoint. But I told him, sometimes you come up with some certain lists, and I'm just like, that's nuts. Like, that's.
So again, to recap, he had Iowa behind
East Carolina,
Tulsa, or no, excuse me, UTSA. Maybe Tulsa was ahead of them.
Yeah.
As far as game environments, I mean, he's not been to all these different venues. I'm not going to discredit the guy. I've never had a conversation. He's not been to all these different venues. Give me a break.
No.
So the good news for Iowa fans is they're going to have the 12th man. They're going to have packed houses. That is, those are the types of things, Mark, where we talk about trying to squeeze that last drop out of a ketchup bottle. They're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to do that to the extent they did last year. I mean, you just can't. You can't do that year in and year out. You're not always going to be able to hit your absolute ceiling like they did. So you've got to be better. You got to be better in the trenches. We've talked about quarterback play ad nauseum. The schedule was part of how they were able to manage that last year with Indiana tanking as the season went on. You had Maryland on the road. You had a Penn State game where, Penn State jumps out on Iowa early. Sean Clifford goes down. Like, that's the worst case scenario for Penn State in that game, and it happens. And so, like, that everything went Iowa's way. It's not going to happen that way this year. Now, you hope the ball drops your way. You hope certain things can happen. Iowa certainly was able to win a lot of close games via turnovers, which were a big part of the winning formula last year. But they're going to have to be better in the trenches. They're going to have to be better at quarterback play. And it starts week one because we talked with the South Dakota State play-by-play guy whose name escapes me at the moment, Tyler Merriam. He talked about how great of a coach John Stiegelmeier is, and Don Patterson has talked about how great of a coach John Stiegelmeier is. I mean, he is a really good coach. Now, he's got a big talent gap to deal with in that game, but that's a program that's not afraid to go on the road and play Power 5 FBS and Power 5 teams. So it's going to be a fun time. But I was surprised. I'll let the cat out of the bag because he said it on the air. Scott Docterman's got Iowa at 10-2. I found that very intriguing. I'm not saying it's impossible. I certainly, I'll give this away. I think I've talked about this in the past. I do not have Iowa at 10-2. I went through and picked all my games yet, but I ain't got no Iowa at 10-2. I'll tell you that, Mark. And last year, I think I did. I had to go back and look, but I had Iowa at 10-2 winning the West, and they went 10-2, won the West. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope they go 12-0, Mark. How about a win in Columbus, a win at home against Michigan, a win at home against Wisconsin, a win at Purdue, a win at Minnesota, a win at home against Iowa State, and then you take care of Nebraska like they always do. So, and of course, we mix in Northwestern and at Illinois. That's a gauntlet, man. And somebody, who was it that I was listening to, Mark? Who was it that I was listening to on some other show? And I don't listen, I think you're the same way. I don't take in a ton of other content from other people. I just don't. Part of it's time. I mean, you just don't have time, Mark. Yeah. But somebody on a national network made another comment about the West. And I've never really, I know we're kind of going all over the place with this discussion, but I've never really gotten like my feathers ruffled by somebody insulting the West. I think it was on ESPN, but somebody made a comment about how the West is a joke. Who was that? Somebody for ESPN, and I can't think of who it was, but somebody made a comment about how the West is a joke. And, I'm starting to get really kind of bothered by that, because it is such a ridiculous narrative, because people are comparing the West to the East, which we know is, I think it's clear they're better top to bottom. I think they're also more top heavy. I think the Big Ten is more balanced. But to act like the West is some, Pac-12 South, Pac-12 North, I mean, come on. I think that's ridiculous. And I think, all those teams we just brought up, we're not overhyping Minnesota, and I don't think we're overhyping Purdue. Wisconsin's good every year. I don't know. Your thoughts on that? You hear the same narrative out there on a daily.
So I guess we have to take the Big 12 out of the equation, because there are no divisions. So we have 4 other major conferences with 8 divisions. I'm going to say that the Big Ten West, off the top of my head, and I hate to do this because I usually like to be very formulaic to look at it, it's the 4th best division in college football. So it's far from a joke.
So you've got it behind the SEC East, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough.
Probably.
I think that's fair, but I think it's debatable. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me either.
Debatable, sure.
But I think that's fair. But they're I think they're clearly the 4 best divisions in college football. And if you split up the Big 12 North and South, they're still the 4 best divisions in college football.
Yeah.
Now, certainly Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, this year, if we're just talking this year, but I mean, Texas. What has Texas done? On a national, I mean, people want to rip the West teams for not being factors nationally. Iowa, for instance, going 10-2 and then getting spanked against Michigan. What has Texas done recently on a national scale? So, this is just a fun time of year. We've been talking so long and hard about this for so long now, and I hope. Here's what I hope. I hope that as we get closer to the season, I hope we don't get a bombshell. It seems like at times as we get closer to college football, there at times are storylines that take away from the joy of the season beginning. And I think of 2020 for Iowa football, and I'm not criticizing the players that came through with the racial stuff, but you'll recall that broke in June. And then the week before the season started, you had these players come forward with this lawsuit, which I think was calculated. I thought it was a bit classless on the part of Akram Wadley and the guys who filed this lawsuit, not because they filed the lawsuit. That's a discussion for another day, but because they did it the week before a big game against Purdue, which they ended up losing. And I'm certainly not blaming the lawsuit. I doubt that had a huge impact, but to me, it looked bad on the part of those students to announce that lawsuit when they did. There's how many players on that roster, they're working their tail off, regardless if you want to accuse the coaches of racial disparities. They did that to the players as well. The players also were hurt by that fallout. And so hopefully that doesn't happen. I don't think anything like that happened last year as far as storylines taking away from football. But all this realignment talk is great. But we got football in just a few weeks, so I hope we can just enjoy it.
Well, considering how excruciatingly close both of those losses were to start the season, if that lawsuit had any impact, that
Correct,
cost any impact that would have turned one of those games the other direction, then that cost Iowa an appearance in the Big Ten championship game.
Very much true. And I'm not going to blame the players that filed that lawsuit on Iowa blowing a 17-0 lead at home against Northwestern. But you're right. And you're right about how close Iowa was a couple plays away from being 8-0. And we're talking now, they go 8-0, Mark. Are they in the playoff that year?
Well, they've got to play Ohio State in the
True.
Big Ten championship game.
True. So they would not. I'm thinking of the condensed season. So they would have
there would have been 2 undefeated teams in the Big Ten championship game.
So 8-1, they would have gone. I would. Was that a Rose Bowl year for the playoff?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm just wondering where they would have went bowling. But 8-1, not far off.
That was a Rose Bowl year played in the Cotton Bowl in the playoff. Played in Dallas at Jerry's World because of
that's right.
COVID situation. So
wow.
Is it, you even call it the Rose Bowl when it's not played at when it's played in Texas and it's in the playoff?
And it wasn't even, right. It wasn't even in the playoff. It was in the playoff. So And to answer Spark CW, he asked a question about Akram Wadley having a signed football scandal. I don't know what the latest on that was. That was a long time ago, but there were some accusations on social media that Akram had signed footballs how did that go? I don't want to, I really shouldn't try to formulate that, but there was some controversy about Akram cheating some people out of some money. I hope that got resolved. I hope he took care of that. And as far as the lawsuit's concerned, this is how long things take, Mark. That was 2 years ago. I mean, literally 2 years, a little less than 2 years because the season started in October, but at least we've got football this year. Stadiums are selling out. It's going to be, last year was normal to some degree, but we were still kind of coming out of the unsurety. And I'm not saying COVID's gone, but I'm just saying from a football standpoint, this is going to be it feels like the first clean year in a while.
I recall there being games canceled, but they were made up, a handful of games last year.
Anyway, were they all made up? That's a good question.
I can't think of anyone who played less than 12 games.
Mark, here's a question. Will there be games canceled this year because of COVID?
Well, we had bowl games canceled last year.
Right. Do you believe that there will be games canceled this year or postponed due to COVID? That's a question.
The odds tell us yes.
And I'm not asking if you think they should be canceled. Just to make clear, I'm not asking that. I'm asking if you think they will be canceled or postponed due to the virus.
Yeah. My answer to the first question would very much lead everyone to know my political thoughts to a certain extent, but those are out there anyway. But yes, that I believe that the odds tell us that a game's going to get canceled at some point.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to think that if there are games postponed, that they would get made up. I don't know even know what the testing protocol is now for athletes if they're fully vaccinated and what. I mean, I'm going to get into the conversation, but that was a conversation we were having in 2020 and even in 2021. So it's nice that things are more manageable now. But I'm just excited for fall camp beginning tomorrow. I know we talked a bit about the depth chart last week, Mark, but I had a conversation with Scott about that depth chart. So if anybody hasn't checked out that show with Scott Dockerman, it is available on my channel from the Hawkeye of the Storm and also on your podcast platforms. So Spotify, Anchor, Google, from the Hawkeye of the Storm. But he had some interesting takes on the roster. I think we were pretty much in agreement on the freshmen because that's always a conversation. That's something that we'll definitely have to talk about in the coming weeks, what true freshmen will play. Because it seems like people really, have you noticed that with other fan bases? Do other fan bases get really intrigued by true freshmen, Mark?
Oh, everyone always wants to know what the next wave is. And that's why recruiting's so big. It's that hope for the future. It's just the speculation, but specific to the next football season. Yeah, I think it's a really intriguing conversation to have, to try to determine beyond the recruiting rankings and just saying, okay, these were the 5 highest recruited players in last year's class, therefore they should have the most impact. To look into it a little bit more thoughtfully and make projections based on which units really need somebody to step up, need an impact player from the freshman class, and maybe who, like with Xavier Wampa, who may just be overwhelmingly so advanced in terms of talent and skill set that you can't help but put them on the field.
And I do, just so you know, I do want to address Spark CW's last two questions in a moment, because they're really good questions I actually wanted to discuss anyways. But that is something that I know Iowa fans really get into. Which true freshmen are going to see the field this year, even if it's on special teams? So I don't have this written down, but just off memory, the guys that I had mentioned to Scott that I foresee playing, obviously Wampa is a true freshman. I see Aaron Graves playing. Aaron Graves did not enroll early, but he's there now. I think he'll play. I think he's too athletic and too dynamic of a true freshman to not play, even though they're pretty deep along the defensive line. So I think he'll get in there. TJ Hall will play, I believe, as a true freshman. He enrolled early at corner. I think Brian Allen's going to have a shot because he enrolled early, just like Connor Colby and David Cobb got hurt last year, but he would certainly had a shot. We saw Bruce and Johnson work in. And then the one guy that Scott mentioned that I did not, that he's heard really good things about so far in summer workouts, is Jacob Bostic. So 6'2" wide receiver from Illinois. And that would make sense because Iowa's thin at receiver. We know they lost Jackson Ritter for the season. He's the only guy outside those top three returning, and Bruce, Johnson, and Reganey. He's the only guy left that had significant, actually worthwhile snaps last year. So to lose him as a blow, you lose Charlie Jones, you lose Tracy, and I've heard nothing. Arlen Bruce went on the record in an interview and basically was quite bullish on Bostic, that he's looking really good. And Mark, wide receiver is one of those positions that it's not. I'm not saying it's easy to play as a freshman, but it's not nearly as difficult as some of the other positions. So running back and receiver specifically. So maybe we'll see a guy like Bostic who does have some height, and Iowa doesn't have a whole lot of height on the outside to fill that prototypical X position. If it's not Brody Brecht, who's also on scholarship and is a big guy, he's also a star pitcher for Iowa. If it's not Brecht, you're going to have maybe a guy like Bostic stepping into that role. They've got other candidates. Deontay Vines is a guy that I asked Scott about specifically, who just kind of is there and he's on scholarship, and just don't hear a whole lot about him. So it will be intriguing to see how, if Bostic plays and where. I'm sure he will, even if it's on special teams. And then the other guy Scott mentioned specifically was Brandon Diaz Fernandez. It sounds like he's really come along, and he's ahead of everybody. You've got Jamari Harris, Terry Roberts, Riley Moss, and then Diaz Fernandez listed. It's not Hall. Hall's a freshman, even though he played well in the spring. So did Diaz Fernandez. So those are some guys to look for. Diaz Fernandez, not a true freshman, young. So those are some guys to look for here early, especially as you get, that first month of the season, Mark. You're going to have 4 very winnable games. Now, I think all of them have their, possibility for a slip up, but you hope that some of those true freshmen, if they're going to play them, and of course you get 4 games for free and maintain that eligibility. If you're going to play them, those would be the games to get them on either offense or defense.
Let's honor a couple super chats here. Erica, we so much appreciate you being here as always. Thank you so much for that. Scott Frost seemed a bit nervous at Big Ten Media Days for sure. And I'll make this other note. And again, I'm typically not the guy that draws these kind of conclusions, but Scott Frost also doesn't ever appear as though he's enjoying the moment himself, enjoying the conversation, the communication with the media, or any of that, enjoying talking about his players, enjoying conveying a story, any of that.
Mark, he's happy to throw his players under the bus. He's happy to talk about his players when they lose, though. That's one thing that really bothers me about Scott Frost is you're right. It's all now at media days. I don't think he made it about him, but I also saw it as a coach who was kind of had nothing left to say. It's just it's do or die time. And I respect that to some extent, but he's got to start taking accountability for himself and for, losses, because they ain't going 12-0. And so when you lose, take accountability. I will say what you want about Kirk Ferentz. He does take accountability. He does not throw his players under the bus. And you got to respect that in your coach.
Yeah, it's just like any situation where you're trying to build and maintain trust that if you're going to win and lose as a team and you call yourself a team, then, leave it to the critics to determine the blame that seems to be obvious by watching the game. But for you yourself, you obviously have the backs of your players and say that we lost as a team. That doesn't mean you can't analyze the game and say we need to run the ball better, or we need to eliminate some mistakes, or, certainly be honest about that. But yeah, that tears down the trust within the locker room, certainly. Also, Lemansky jumps in here. So before we get to some of these other questions that you'd like to hit on, Corey, Big Ten West coaches are great. Guys, your thoughts?
They are. I mean, you love you some PJ Fleck. Now, there have been some allegations. There have been some allegations in the offseason that maybe he's not as liked as some people thought behind closed doors. But who knows? Who knows what's true there? But PJ Fleck, Kirk Ferentz, Pat Fitzgerald. I think Brett Bielema is we've talked about Brett. He is a darn good coach, and I think he'll get it done at Illinois. To what extent, we'll have to wait and see. And Jeff Brom is kind of he's an interesting one. I don't know how you rate Jeff Brom. He's just such a unique guy, and he's owned Iowa of late, and he's one of the best offensive minds in the country. But he also has kind of underachieved at times. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what they do this year.
Has he underachieved? What do we expect of Purdue football? It's such a spotty, sketchy history.
True. Yeah, if you're weighing history, I think he's done just fine.
Killer is the standard.
I think people, when they see it, and I'm probably included in that, when you see how dynamic that pass offense is, you view it kind of like you view Iowa's defense. Like, if you could just get a decent unit to support it. And in their case, they've had, early on, they were their first year, that defense was one of the best in the country, right? It's amazing how the switch kind of flipped, but they just need a run game. And so they bring back King Doru, and we'll see if they can get that going, because if they do, they're going to have one of the best offenses out there. And yes, that's without David Bell, without, any of their other top receivers they've had, but with Aiden O'Connell and Jeff Brom at the helm, they'll be great. So I think Big Ten West, Scott Frost is kind of bringing him down, Mark, from just a perception standpoint. He's the one guy, he's the one guy who you wouldn't give a passing grade to for the most part, year in and year out.
We can take it past perception to the results.
Yeah, absolutely.
Results. Yeah, that would be an interesting exercise to undertake. So I have ranked the coaches in the particular conferences, but then to rank those conferences against each other and those divisions against each other.
I can see the wheels turning, Mark.
Well, the wheels are turning, but it's just an impossible
upcoming video
to go through on the fly. But the only way we would ever find out is have them all switch schools.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
That would be fascinating. And
for any Michigan fans who hate Kirk Ferentz in Iowa, Kirk has had his opportunities to go to, my understanding, he had an opportunity to go to Michigan, right? When was that? Do you remember those?
That would have been when they hired either Rich Rod or Brady Hoke. So I was
going to say Rich Rod. I think
7 or 11.
Yeah. So, anyways, discussion for another day. But I think for what the West programs are dealing with, from a disadvantage in some cases with history, and in some cases recruiting territory, they do pretty darn well.
Absolutely. I think there had been some questions you saw in the chat, correct, that you wanted to jump on?
Well, yeah, we can go ahead and acknowledge this other super chat if you want, from Erica. Don't forget it. Didn't X play wide receiver in high school? Any possibility he does that at Iowa? It may be a good idea. Yeah, I answered that. Somebody asked that question here last few days. I know it's intriguing. I don't really know how feasible it is when you have a guy who's clearly projected to be a safety at the next level to just all of a sudden transition to receiver in 2022. Does that happen? You know, is more likely probably to happen back in the 80s and 90s. That'd be a better question for, again, Don Patterson. But I think they'd have to get pretty desperate because I think they see value in him learning because he's going to play early. I mean, he's going to play this year on defense. That's what we've got to realize. Yes, he was not on the 2 deep, but I think they have plans to play him. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the 2 deep by the end of fall camp, Mark. So he's going to play a lot. And but it is an intriguing conversation. They've got guys who have some experience at wide receiver. Let's not forget Caden Wetjen's a transfer who looked pretty good in the spring. Iowa was depleted with injuries. That's a concern if you're an Iowa fan. They had a lot of injuries over the spring. And Caden Wetjen looked pretty good. And so you get him taking some reps this fall. Maybe he becomes a guy who can become that 4th guy. Right now it's Alec Wick, according to the depth chart, who's a Regina kid, Iowa City Regina kid, who set a bunch of records in Iowa high school at Regina. But yeah, good question, Erica. I wouldn't rule it out. I'd say it's unlikely at this point, but if Iowa gets desperate, they certainly have a guy who's got good athleticism. And it's wide receiver is not the most difficult position to pick up in some regards. So fair question. We can get back up to the conversation or the question from Spark. Let me see if I can find lots of great comments and questions today from everybody. Spark CW says, how many games would you give Spencer Petras if he sucks at the beginning of the season? 2 to 3, then insert Padilla, or what? Well, I'm going to answer the question based on the wording of the question, Mark. How many games would I, because he said Corey here, how many games would I give Spencer? Listen, if Spencer struggles, you don't want any quarterback or any player looking over their shoulder constantly, but Spencer's a senior, okay? Like, he needs to understand that he has not had a single year of over 60%. He's been mediocre at best in almost every other category that we really care about as it relates to passer proficiency. If he struggles the first half against South Dakota State, I'm considering putting in Padilla because, first of all, I know the feeling is that he's won this job. And that may be the case. I've actually stated that I think there's about I gave it about a 98.8% chance. So I leave like 1.2% chance for Padilla and Labus together. But I give about a 98.8% chance that Petras starts on week 1 against South Dakota State. With that being said, if I'm coaching Spark CW, and certainly I'm not the mind that Iowa's coaches are, Kirk Ferentz or anybody else on that staff, but if you're asking my opinion, I would not have much of a leash because neither of these guys have proven to be leaps and bounds ahead of the other. So if one guy's not getting it done, I'm fine with even a 2-quarterback system at times. Even Don Patterson has talked about that. He's a QB guru. He's talked about, at times there's nothing wrong with playing both. Just because you proclaim a quarterback the starter at the end of fall camp, heck, 2 weeks before, you had no idea who you were going with, theoretically. Sure. So I don't know about Labus. Labus is he's an intriguing one because of his athleticism, because of his mobility. You hear less and less as the season gets closer. But no, between these, Spencer and Padilla, stats aside or stats weighed, were pretty comparable last year. Padilla, his stats were actually a notch below Spencer's, but neither of them were good. And I also won by... One thing Kirk Ferentz falls back on a lot, Mark, is Spencer has led us to victory, but he's also brought up the fact that so is Alex. And I've had people bring up, well, they would have never beaten Nebraska had Spencer not come in the game in the second half. First of all, how do we know that? Why do we keep saying that? Get this fly buzzing around me. Why do we know that, Mark? And second of all, if you watch that second half against Nebraska back, they broke out a big run behind Tyler Goodson. Spencer Petras snuck it in for a touchdown. You mentioned the punt block that was caught midair, mind you. I'll give you a quote from Seinfeld there. Midair, caught by Kyler Fisher. He returns over a touchdown. So, yes, Spencer led him to victory. But we act like, that's the epitome of we give the quarterback too much credit when you win. You also give him too much blame when you lose. But I think to place that comeback against Nebraska on Spencer's shoulders is putting the cart ahead of the horse.
The term midair made its debut on Seinfeld. Is that what we're saying?
No, they were. Don't you? Anybody remember the Magic Loogie episode where they're talking about? Well, it's a spinoff of the JFK assassination, but they're talking about Newman and Kramer are talking about the magic loogie that hit them from the Mets player that was walking out of the stadium, and Jerry's talking. He's explaining it like the attorney. And you don't remember this story?
I vaguely remember it. I've seen every episode of Seinfeld probably 2 to 3 times.
Okay, yeah. He says so. This is a loogie that
fan.
Hit the left hip, took a right turn midair, mind you. No, that's how my mind works at times. It pulls up Seinfeld quotes, but no, the point is, I do think that we put way too much blame and credit for quarterbacks, and so I'm not going to give Spencer some huge leash if he's proclaimed the starter week 1. Who cares? You play the guy that's playing well at this point. Neither has jumped ahead.
So there's a number of directions I'll take it here. First and foremost, I wasn't asked the question, but I will interject my opinion regardless. I guess the answer is 14 games. That he was given 14 games last year.
Well, the argument can be made. The argument can be made that they didn't have better options last year. That argument can be made.
That was going to be my next point. You're as a head coach, you're the options available also weigh into the decision. It's just not the play of the starting quarterback. It's what is the backup option? Do you have the backup like J.J. McCarthy at Michigan, or like Kyle McCord at Ohio State? No, you don't. But I can't evaluate Alex Padilla because I don't see him in practice, and we've not seen enough of him, at least in my estimation, to know.
Don't make me go on a rant, Mark. Don't make me go on a rant. You're talking about we can't evaluate Alex or Joey Labus? Or is that what you said? Joey Labus or Alex Padilla?
I said Padilla.
We can't evaluate any of them. You know why? Because guess what? Well, we can't.
They can.
But we should at least have a glimpse, but we don't. Because the only open scrimmage we got in the spring, the guys were not given equal snaps against equal competition. We saw Spencer Petras take like 90% of the snaps against the ones. So how do you evaluate anything based on that?
If I had a reasonable expectation that Alex Padilla could be an average Big Ten quarterback, or even below average Big Ten quarterback, let's say the 9th or 10th best Big Ten quarterback, I would have yanked Spencer Petras after the Purdue game. That's when I would have pulled him. I'm looking at the game log right now and going through what my thought process was at the time. After the Purdue game, 4 picks, 1 touchdown on the board against a decent defense.
I think it's a little bit. Now, did C.J. Stroud, correct me if I'm wrong, C.J. Stroud was a true freshman last year?
He was a redshirt freshman.
He was a redshirt freshman.
I've never thrown a pass.
So, and Joey Labus is a redshirt freshman this year. Now, C.J. Stroud was arguably the best quarterback in the Big Ten last year, right?
No, not arguably.
Okay. You're right. He was the best quarterback in the Big Ten last year.
He was arguably the best quarterback in the country.
Yeah. So now I understand talent and whatever else. For anybody who wants to act like, Joey Labus should not be in the conversation, that's what bothers me when I see going through the spring a guy like Labus not getting equal snaps against this, against the ones and against the twos as the other two guys, and seeing him on every play rolling out right, which proves that they don't have confidence in him in any other scheme. I just think that proves that either we have a lack of ability to teach these guys our offense, or the offense is just way too complex. And we've talked about this for so long. This has been something the media has discussed and written about, and the coaches have been asked about it, and they've talked about simplifying things. Scott Docterman just the other day told me that he went through like a 6-hour session with Brian Ferentz recently, and Scott talked about how complicated it is. It's tough to learn. This is a tough system to learn. Then simplify it, Mark. I don't understand. You're talking about how complicated it is, and yet they're 123rd in total offense. So if it's that complicated and it's not working, like it's one thing if you go to Ohio State, Mark, if you sat down with Jason Day and he was talking you through this, or Jason Day, back into golf, Ryan Day, and he's talking you through the offense, and it takes you 6 hours, and you walk away and say, man, that thing's complicated. At least we can understand there's a method to the madness. There ain't no method to no madness when you're 123rd in total offense, and the narrative is that the offense is really, really complicated. It makes no sense. So I guess my point is There's no reason to think Labus shouldn't be in the conversation this year. But the language from Big Ten media days and what I saw in spring and the one little glimpse that we had into spring practice is that the coaches do not believe Labus is ready. And even if he were, we wouldn't know because we're not seeing equal snaps against equal competition. I hope I'm not trying to lay into the coaching staff, but this is going to continue to come up. People who say, well, let it go. This is going to continue to come up, Mark, because the quarterback competition is something that we're going to continue to talk about. So I think it's Spencer's job. Not saying I want that or I do or I don't, but I think it's Spencer's job right now. I hope it's an open competition. And frankly, Carson May should be equally involved in that competition. Now, he did not enroll early. He is a true freshman. He's a 4-star kid. See if he can push him. But given the reputation of the offense being complicated, there's no way he's going to be ready this year. You got guys who get hurt, and depending on testing protocol, if guys aren't able to play, you decimate a room. Carson May could see the field. That's part of the reason why maybe it's time to simplify things a bit. And perhaps they have. Scott talked about wide receiver routes and route trees being simplified a bit. And it sounds like the coaching staff really went through a reflection during the offseason and tried to figure out, okay, how can we, a deep dive, if you will, into the complexities of the offense. But I just don't know, based on what I hear, that it's been simplified enough to make a huge difference. And desperate times come for desperate measures, and the offense is in a desperate place with Brian Ferentz as your quarterback's coach and an offensive coordinator, and with where they're ranked. Looking back to last season, it is desperation time. And Andy brings up John Budmeyer. I'm glad he does. Perhaps John Budmeyer can make a big difference. Chuck Hartlieb seemed to think that he's going to. Now, Chuck is biased because John's a relative of his now. But perhaps he does, and perhaps he can help to simplify things a bit because, although Wisconsin has had great running back after great running back and great offensive lines, they run a pretty efficient offense typically. They weren't very good last year, but typically it's a pretty efficient offense. And I don't remember how many years Budmeyer was a QB's coach at Wisconsin. It wasn't a real long time, but it was a pretty good year at quarterback with Jack Cohn when he was there. So perhaps he can help them simplify things a bit and become a little bit more efficient.
The offense was 123rd in the nation. That's not an aberration. It's usually somewhere between 90 and 110. And they have a quarterback who, by all measurements, and we ran through the numbers versus the rest of the Big Ten, was somewhere in the 12 to 14 range. So one of the 3 worst quarterbacking performances. And I know it's a total team effort, but I don't know. So by not making a change, you're either saying we didn't recruit well, or you're saying we didn't recruit well and we don't develop quarterbacks, or since we are winning games based on defense and special teams excellence, we're willing to just go with.
Or we just don't evaluate the guys we have well, right?
Maybe that could be it too.
That's part of it. And I think recruiting wise, I don't necessarily think you point at recruiting. I think you can look at recruiting for not really having mobile guys on the roster right now, because they really don't. Like Carson May ain't real mobile. Petrus certainly ain't mobile. Padilla is a little
4-star, wasn't he?
Who?
Spencer Petrus. Right?
High, I think, depending on what service you look at, I think he ended up a high 3 on 247. I think.
Bill,
Carson May is a 4-star. No, they've recruited well. They got Marco Linez coming in next year, who is a high 3-4. No, they've actually, I think, recruited well. But the guys who have been your mobile, like Deuce Hogan, and we brought up Peyton Manziel, guys who are a little bit more mobile, typically don't end up playing as much. So why is that? Is that evaluation? Is that those guys just circumstances end up where those guys just don't develop like the more statuesque, is that the right term, quarterbacks? I don't know. They have the answer to that. But the bottom line is you hope John Budmeyer can change some of that, because he is going to be in Brian's ear. He can't teach, and yes, he's getting paid now. That was, we knew that was going to happen anyways, because his contract was running out from Colorado State, so he was going to be working for free. So he's getting paid now from Iowa. He was making, what was he making? Like $270,000 a year to be an unpaid analyst here. So we talked about him being unpaid back in the
I
spring.
get my information from you. Yes, I remember that figure.
Yeah, he was getting paid handsomely by the Rams. So now he's going to be who knows what he's making now. I'd be interested to find that out, but he'll help. And he can't be on. You don't want a violation like Nebraska faced recently, but he'll help Brian Ferentz in some regards. You'd have to think.
Quarterbacks ranked below Spencer Petras in the same recruiting class, ranked below him. He was 19th rated in the country. Include Michael Penix, Jack Plummer. I love this next name, Will Levis.
Iowa did go after him, just for the record. Iowa did go after. Really, the first Power 5 offer was Iowa for Will.
So we're saying that there are quarterbacks who were evaluated to be lesser than Spencer Petras, but have turned out to be. I'm not saying that Jack Plummer's anything great. Obviously, he lost the job to Aiden O'Connell, but he did win the job.
What would Jack Plummer be here?
Think about how good Aiden O'Connell is, and Jack Plummer beat him out like twice.
Right.
And he's off to Cal. Thank you. Knew it was in the Pac-12 and knew I had just heard a conversation about it. Yes, I now have the Pac-12 network and was watching Pac-12 Media Days the other day and recorded all of it. So, yes, I was listening to the conversation about Cal football. Anyway, Will Levis. Ben Bryant is going to be the starter at Cincinnati this year. Nick Patty was the backup to Kenny Pickett at Pitt.
Where was Zach Wilson? Because obviously,
yes, he's coming up. Clayton Tune, the starting quarterback, really good at Houston.
Yep.
Brock Purdy, Alan Bowman, who threw 33 touchdowns in parts of 2 seasons at Texas Tech. Zach Wilson, yes.
Zach Wilson. So again, back to Zach Wilson. We've talked about this, but anybody that doesn't know the story there, and I won't go into details as to what has been reported, but Iowa basically said, hey, we were going with Spencer over Zach in so many words to sum that situation up. And, now again, would he have developed into what he is now? I mean, who knows? We don't know. To your point, we don't know if that's recruiting, if that's evaluating, if that's development. What is it? Or maybe it's a combination.
According to the services, Kirk and the
according to the services, correct.
They made the right choice.
Right. However, I think there's something to be said for, identifying your.
Oh, absolutely.
Your Antonio Browns, right? These guys who are, completely off the radar.
For sure. Iowa football talk with all of you each and every Tuesday night at 4:30 Central Time. Please make it a point. We typically start slow in regards to people filtering in, and then here we are near the conclusion with about 100 plus on the line. So please join us on time next week. We send out the notifications and set up the stream, and it's all there for you to jump on immediately. Erica, I think that ratings don't mean much. Erica, please don't let me go on a rant and make you feel bad.
Well, I agree with her to a point, Mark. You have to look at through Iowa.
Well, not every rating, obviously.
Well, but you have to look at it through Iowa fans' perspectives. That being a developmental school, so you're right. The vast majority. We can get into this. Is a long conversation, but look at all the guys who Iowa has developed from 0 to 2, 3-star status.
Sure.
So that point can be made. Now, not at quarterback, but a lot of Iowa fans feel that way to some extent because they're used to the development that we've been spoiled with over the years at other positions.
If I just read off the quarterback list of Spencer Petras's class, it would be obvious that the rankings mean a lot.
At court, yeah. For the vast sum of schools and at quarterback, certainly.
If we took the rankings for any year at any position, it would show you that the rankings mean,
but probably not the guys that went to Iowa. You'd probably see a lot of outliers, Mark, in the guys who Iowa signed, right? Like
the top 4 guys are all NFL quarterbacks.
Yeah, I understand, but like Desmond King, Micah Hyde, Josie Jewell, Seth Benson, we can just go on, Jack Campbell, on and on and on with these guys. I'm just saying Iowa, understand that when people like Erica make these comments, it's because of their perspective as Iowa people.
Yeah, yeah, there is validity to what she is saying there because there are a zillion examples, but those zillion examples are in an ocean of overwhelming data that tells you that the rankings are they're valid, they're accurate.
And Erica, yeah, she's talking about the high school ratings. Appreciate that super chat. But let me just throw this up here. This is a good point by Quack Quack. Iowa being a developmental school is based on the idea of rankings mattering. Fair point, right? Fair point. I mean, it is based upon the idea that rankings do matter. But I think you're right, Eric. And I think you also have to look at the combination of evaluating, because like Mark, I guarantee you, if I was eligible, if I was still back in high school and Phil Parker recruited me right now and said, I'm going to give you a scholarship, he ain't going to be, listen, I ain't playing on Sundays. I'll be right back on this show in a couple of years, Mark. So my point is you still have to be able to evaluate. You have to identify potential, right? It's not just about the development side, but it's identifying, okay, who are the guys that are flying under the radar that we feel we can develop. So it's a combination.
We started a series that we will need to pick up next off season, and we'll take it through like 20 years. And we will take Corey through all the recruiting classes and we will evaluate them. I'll just be interested to hear, were the better Iowa recruiting classes, and when I say better, I mean the higher ranked at the time, did they turn out to be the better classes or not?
And Mark, one more thing before we end the show. Are we still planning? I don't know if it's going to be a live show we're recording, but we're still going to have this tight end discussion here soon, right?
Yes. So, well, you are invited over to the end of the Miami stream to jump on a Thursday night. Yes.
Yes. So it's this coming Thursday, right?
We can do it this Thursday. Sure.
So for all the Iowa fans out there, this coming Thursday evening at the Miami at the Voice of College Football channel, bring a bunch of Iowa love over to the Hurricanes. Now, I'd love to. I'm looking forward to that discussion.
The only thing I'm asking for is a parameter to be placed on the debate, on the discussion. Is this all time? Is this the last 20 years? Is this currently? What is this? That's all I ask for.
We will establish those parameters. I have a pretty good idea what I want them to be. I think they should be based upon largely on NFL success, right? So number of years, right? Number of years being the primary starter, or maybe you want to just look at games started in total in the NFL. Longevity is difficult because injuries happen. What you gonna bring up? You're gonna bring up what's his face? Greg Olson? Is that who you're thinking? I guarantee you.
I don't need to bring up anything. I'm not debating on the other side. If I was taking up for Miami and just to play devil's advocate and fill it in, I'd have a lot of ammunition to work with, boy.
Well, I'll look forward to that. I'll be prepared for this Thursday.
Wow.
What time is it? 8 Eastern?
Jeremy Shockey.
Yeah, I know.
Greg Olson.
Yeah.
A lot of others. Anyway.
Dallas Clark, George Kittle, T.J. Hawkinson, Noah Fant, C.J. Fedorowicz, Brandon Myers. We can both.
What kind of NFL career did Brandon Myers have?
Really good NFL career. In fact, he was the starter for the Bucs. Yes.
Okay. All right.
He ended up starting for the Bucs at one point.
Yeah. I think both of you need to be very strategic with your parameters you place on the time frame. Because
sir.
Recency sways. I mean, real recency sways Iowa's way. If we're going back 30 years, then
Tony Moyaki. Iowa's had a couple of guys who've had their careers derailed by injury, which I don't think it should be counted against the school that developed them. Tony Moyaki being one, C.J. Fedorowicz being another.
That goes against your initial.
I know. That's why I think both things should be weighed.
Oh, obviously, yes, absolutely. Like if there was a player who was this amazing All-American who caught 75 passes a year in college, and then they went to the NFL and were a complete bust, never caught a pass, well, it should still be credited highly that they were a dominant player in college, or the reverse.
I think NFL scouts know what they're doing. So I think draft selection should be a huge part of our criteria. Is that fair?
I don't think so, but
why? Why? Isn't that the premise of this?
Because they got drafted, so they then had the opportunity to play and show whether that draft selection was warranted.
Okay, but again, what they do after they leave school is what does that got to do? That's their life, right? We're talking about how Iowa and Miami have developed these kids and gotten them ready for the next level. And obviously, if NFL scouts are saying these guys are first round or second round draft picks, Mark, then you think NFL scouts know what they're doing?
Yes, they do. I believe that your initial comment was that their NFL career should weigh heavily into the conversation.
Well, that's a part of the conversation. Listen, you're putting me on the spot with this criteria conversation. We need to establish it. I think it should be part of it. I think it's fair, but I do think things like injuries and draft selection should all be part of it. I don't think because a guy accumulates a ton of stats in college, I don't think that should have anything to do with it. Just because Iowa uses the tight end a lot, no. Mark, just because Iowa uses the tight end a lot, I will not bring up Sam Laporta once in this conversation because he hasn't proven himself the next level. He was Iowa's best receiver last year.
If we were discussing quarterback play,
yeah,
Iowa versus whomever, you would not bring up Chuck Long, who did nothing in the NFL and was a great college quarterback.
No, that's not what I said. Chuck Long where was he drafted?
Detroit Lions.
First round?
I don't know.
I don't know that either, but I'm saying he was listen, he still was in the NFL. He still had a career in the NFL, even though the NFL career. I'm saying we're not just going to look at stats in college and determine that if a scout is projecting forward.
He was a first round pick, 12th pick in the draft.
Yes. If a scout is projecting forward that this guy is a first or second round draft pick, that's credit Iowa. Just because Chuck Long didn't pan out in the NFL does not mean he wasn't developed for it, right? Scouts believed he was. That's all I'm saying. Okay. And also, who was it in the chat here? You're going to like this one. Parker Hesse, Lomansky. Parker Hesse, former Iowa defensive end. You remember Parker Hesse, right?
I do.
He's
I don't
right now.
Remember much about him.
Defensive end at Iowa back, the 15 year. He is now on the Atlanta Falcons roster as a tight end. What are your thoughts on that?
What?
Nothing. Nothing. Lomansky brought him up, not me.
There are 3 notable Miami tight ends of the last 15 years that have arguably Hall of Fame statistics for the NFL. 3.
Okay.
Jimmy Graham, Jeremy Shockey, and Greg Olsen.
So again, we're talking collective here. We're not talking top. Right? 3 guys. Well, I'm just saying.
I don't know that can be stated about any team in the country. I think that there are 3 players at that position that have that have Hall of Fame credentials.
Dallas Clark's a Hall of Famer. Kittle's going to be a Hall of Famer. Now, Kittle, I know
Clark is in the Hall of Fame.
Well, if he's not already, he's going to be. No, am I wrong in that? You don't think he's a Hall of Famer?
It's tough to get into the Hall of Fame.
Dallas Clark? Jeremy, did you just... Okay, all right.
I didn't say he was or was not. I'm saying I don't think it's a slam dunk by any stretch of the imagination.
And yet those 3 guys you just brought up are. Every one of those guys.
No, I said that they have an argument.
Right, and that's what I'm saying for Dallas Clark. Dallas Clark and George Kittle, both of those guys already. Kittle has still got a lot of career left, potentially, have strong arguments for the Hall of Fame. And then you supplement those 2 guys who are, I think, future Hall of Famers with those other guys we brought up. I think it's a fair debate to have.
Oh, I think it's a tremendous debate.
I'm not saying recency. I'm not saying recency should have. I don't know how much recency should have to do with this conversation, because when you say tight end university, what does that mean?
Exactly.
It's a fair conversation. Listen, let's not spoil all this now, Mark. We can get into. I got to do some work before Thursday.
I'm not going to open my mouth during the whole thing unless I hear something that I think is completely ridiculous.
Well, you've got a great perspective. People want to hear what the unbiased one says.
See, for as much pushback, Corey, as I give you, I think you understand that when the conversation's been had on the other side, I'm doing the same thing.
Absolutely. And I respect that about you.
All right, sir. Appreciate you being here. Obviously, Corey makes this work. From the Hawkeye of the Storm, everyone. From the Hawkeye of the Storm with Corey. Get on over there for Iowa Football Perspective, especially right now. Training camp starts in just a couple of days. Get there, and we will make it into this season together. We'll be back here next Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time.